Alright folks, how you doing? Welcome back. So this is William Wallace, Robin Hood Revealed, Part 1. Disclaimer. Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowance is made for fair use, yada yada yada. You know the drill, I'm sure. King Alexander III. So in 1286, King Alexander III died under mysterious circumstances. No, he wasn't going to meet his wife. That's a general misconception and bullshit. Soon thereafter, the heir to the Scottish throne, the young Maid Margaret of Norway, also perished under suspicious circumstances whilst on board a ship fitted out at an English port, Great Yarmouth. Just a coincidence, I'm sure. There were a number of contenders for the vacant Scottish crown, the two strongest candidates being John Balliol and Robert the Bruce. By the way, Maid Margaret was only 7 years old. How does a child sicken and die over the course of several days on board a ship? Well, she was poisoned, most likely. King John Balliol, King Edward I of England, and King Philip IV of France were asked to adjudicate the succession. King Edward ruled in favour of John Balliol. He was crowned King of Scots in 1292 on St Andrew's Day, which is November the 30th. In reality, Balliol was a puppet of King Edward, who had bullied the Scottish Parliament into recognising him as Lord Paramount. After being humiliated and undermined for years by King Edward, in 1295, Balliol formed the Auld Alliance with France, which I believe is the oldest military alliance in the world. Might be wrong on that, but I'm sure I heard that somewhere. Earl Corspatrick of Dunbar. So King Edward responded furiously, leading an army north in 1296 to deal with the increasingly defiant Scottish king, who eventually managed to find his balls. He persuaded or otherwise coerced a respected Scottish noble, Earl Corspatrick of Dunbar, to turn traitor and to open the gates of Berwick-Upon-Tweed to the English army at night when no one was around. At midnight, if you want to be specific. The sack of Berwick. So the English sacked Berwick with no resistance and subjected the town to 3 days of rape, looting, and slaughter. Up to 7,000 Scots were massacred. The Scots army under King Balliol prepared to counterattack, but before they could, Earl Corspatrick managed to imprison 4 of Balliol's top earls in Dunbar Castle after luring them there under false pretense. The Sacred Stone of Destiny. So the Scots army was strong, but absent some of its top earls, it was defeated at the Battle of Dunbar. A young William Wallace was said to have been present that day. I've not found any definitive evidence to say whether he was or he wasn't, but I would like to think that he was. John Balliol abdicated and was imprisoned. King Edward marched to Scone unopposed, which was capital back then. Edinburgh didn't become capital until 1437. He had himself crowned King of Scots and had the Sacred Stone of Destiny carried to London, or so he thought. The Knights Templar hid the real one, and I know several Templars in real life. Maybe if I get them drunk enough one night, they'll tell me where the real one is. But I think it's a closely guarded secret. A fateful visit to Dundee. So English dominion over Scotland was now complete, but one man would not stand for it. Young Wallace fatefully visited Dundee one day, encountering a young thug, the constable's son, who tried to rob him. Wallace stood up to this bully, whose name was Selby. He killed him and slew his guards before making good his escape by disguising himself as a woman. And that wouldn't be the only time he did that either, by the way. St. Margaret. Must have seemed like an awfully big woman. Wallace was 6'9". Anyway, I think the guards needed to go to Specsavers. The townsfolk sang songs about Wallace, but his actions placed his family in danger. His uncle, Sir Ranald Crawford, suggested that they move from the area. Wallace and his mother donned pilgrim's robes and visited Dunfermline, the burial place of St. Margaret, or Queen Margaret, same person, a Saxon princess who became wife and queen consort to King Malcolm III Canmore. Sir Richard Wallace. So Sir Ranald decided to send Wallace to his family at Riccarton, Kilmarnock, because there's several Riccartons in Scotland, so wanted to specify that it was the one at Kilmarnock. It wasn't the one at Heriot-Watt University where I got my master's degree as I originally thought. But anyway, after securing a letter of protection for his nephew, as he served as the Sheriff of Ayr. That's Sir Ranald was the Sheriff of Ayr, not Richard Wallace. It was hoped that Sir Richard Wallace would exert a calming influence over his nephew. He was an old blind man, but very wise and well respected. For a few months, Wallace lived a tranquil life at Riccarton. Pushed too far. One day, 5 English knights on patrol harassed Wallace and his young servant as they fished a local river. What a surprise. The English insisted on taking the fish that Wallace had caught. He tried to talk them out of it, but when they pushed him too far, Wallace slew 3 of them, and the other 2 fled. Wallace again found himself an outlaw and was forced to go into hiding. And what's truly remarkable is Wallace was pretty much unarmed. All he had was a fishing pole, and yet he managed to take on 5 knights and beat them up and kill 3 of them. But, he did try to talk them down this time. Instead of just attacking right away, he tried to make up excuses like he was fishing for a friend of his who was abstaining from eating meat and all this kind of thing. But the English just pushed him and pushed him and pushed him. And eventually Wallace just snapped and, well, killed most of them. A very common occurrence as we go through the story. A market day, Sir Richard gave his nephew money to sustain him for a while, and he went to go stay with another one of his uncles. After a few weeks, he grew bored and visited Ayr on a market day. By the way, whenever Wallace turns up at Ayr, it never ends well. Spoilers. Outraged at how the English bullied his fellow Scots, Wallace stood up to a braggart and killed him in front of the townsfolk. Afterwards, he was forced to flee for his life. Arrested. Wallace returned to Ayr a few weeks later, only to see Sir Richard's servants being harassed. His anger got the better of him, and he confronted the English louts. This time they were prepared, and he would not escape. Despite fighting hard and well, his sword hilt broke, leaving him wounded and defenseless. Wallace was arrested and sentenced to be hanged. Imprisoned in Ayr Castle. The English imprisoned Wallace for weeks in Ayr Castle, possibly months actually, depriving him of food and allowing his wounds to fester. On the day that Wallace was to be executed, he slipped into a coma and was presumed dead. Wallace's body was cast out into the castle's rubbish dump. A local woman who had been Wallace's nurse in his youth rescued his body. Thomas the Rhymer. So, the nurse's daughter had just given birth and was able to sustain Wallace with her breast milk until he recovered. A local prophet, Thomas the Rhymer, foretold that Wallace would free Scotland from English rule 3 times. Emboldened by his miraculous survival and the Rhymer's prophecy, Wallace decided that it was time to fight back. So thanks very much for watching part 1. I'll see you soon for part 2.